Imagine for a moment that this is your sprint backlog. Question for you. Do you consider it to be flexible, or do you look at it as being set in stone? Well, that's a question I asked a couple of weeks ago, and the responses I received gave me cause for concern. Welcome back to Development That Pays, and I can tell you that very few people that responded to my little survey were prepared to go as far as declaring their sprint backlog to be set in stone. And I think that's entirely reasonable. If we look at the simplest possible case, we start with a number of items in the sprint backlog. And if we're very, very lucky, they all get done by the end of the sprint, and we've got no time left to do any other work. That's just about as neat and tidy as things get. Perhaps a more likely state of affairs, certainly in my experience, is that at the end of the sprint, we've completed most, but not all of the work. Now, technically, that's something of a waste, but preferable, in my opinion, to the opposite case where we finish all of the work ahead of time and we have to scramble around to find an extra work item or two. So far, so reasonably tidy, but what about a real life sprint? Well, in a real life sprint, a couple of things are reasonably likely to happen. First of all, items can get blocked, and if the blockage turns out to be serious, or at least long-lived, then that may also be a reason to bring in more work. On a more positive note, it's not unusual to discover new work as we move through the sprint. We might discover that one particular work item is really 2 or even 3, and we can have a discussion about which we'll play in the current sprint. Now, I hope you'll agree with me that everything I've described so far could happen to any sprint backlog in any particular sprint. So even if we set out with the intention of setting our sprint backlog in stone, chances are that just in the normal course of doing our work, that it would be changed in some way. So yeah, I was happy to see in the survey results that very few people went as far as saying that their sprint backlog was set in stone. But what really surprised me was that more than 50%, more than half of the respondents considered their sprint backlog to be flexible or very flexible. So this is different in kind to anything we've talked about so far. Either something has popped up unexpectedly or someone has changed their mind. A new item needs to be slotted in to the current sprint. And I guess we should acknowledge the positive intent here. Agile is all about delivering value, and it's about delivering value early. And if something pops up that is indeed more valuable than something that's already in the sprint backlog, then it would seem reasonable, wouldn't it, that we take out the low value and slot in the high value item. But of course, it's probably not quite as simple as that. Before we go ahead and swap something out, it's worth realizing that not every item in the sprint backlog is created equally. The item you're taking away may be contributing to the sprint goal. Therefore, removing it could put the sprint goal in jeopardy. And I was pleased to see that a couple of people said that they might be happy to flex the sprint backlog, but would stay firm on the sprint goal. Extra points for mentioning that because I'd forgotten about it. There's another distinction here between items that are still in to-do and those that have moved into development. Remember that the sprint backlog didn't come for free. It took at least a half a day with the whole team involved to get the items through refinement and through the sprint planning session. And those costs only continue to rise as the item moves from to-do to in progress. Now, you could argue that that's a sunk cost, and yeah, technically it is. But what about the cost of switching? The time it takes to stop working on one item and to pick up and get going on what will be, in this case, a brand new unexpected item. That is not insignificant, as any developer will tell you. I'm a developer And I'm telling you. And because even developers are human, there can be an emotional cost. When a developer picks up an item and starts to work on it, there becomes a connection between the two, a connection that we should be careful before breaking. I've been working on this thing for 2 days straight, and now you want me to just drop it? Are you kidding me? My guess is that the 30% of respondents who consider their backlog to be very flexible would be happy with the value maximization side of the equation, but less so with the potential consequences, specifically because there's a good chance that we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. Let's assume that the new shiny item gets delivered. Awesome. But there's usually a knock-on effect, and not necessarily a good one. The attempt to maximize value in one particular sprint can result in minimizing value over the next 2 or 3 sprints. And the name of the game here is maximizing value over time, not just in one particular sprint.